"You're not getting on this flight." The words cracked across gate C-18 loud enough to turn heads before the boarding line had even moved. Naomi Brooks stopped exactly where she was, one hand resting on the handle of a small black carry-on, her other holding a boarding pass that had been scanned without issue less than 30 seconds earlier. She wore faded blue jeans, a plain charcoal t-shirt, white sneakers, and a lightweight travel jacket folded neatly over her arm. There was nothing flashy about her. No designer luggage. No jewelry announcing wealth. No assistant clearing a path through the crowd. To everyone watching, she looked like another traveler trying to catch an afternoon flight from Dallas to Seattle. That was precisely the point. Naomi had spent years building companies where executives often talked about customer experience from conference rooms they rarely left. She preferred something different. She believed the truth lived where policies met people. That was why she traveled alone whenever she conducted quiet evaluations. She never announced herself. She never warned management. She simply observed. Unfortunately, the first thing she observed that morning was a gate agent staring at her with suspicion instead of professionalism. "Step aside, ma'am," the woman repeated, folding her arms. "This boarding process is for verified passengers." Several people in line exchanged uneasy glances. A middle-aged businessman in an expensive navy suit sighed dramatically. "Can we keep things moving?" he muttered. "Some of us actually have places to be." Naomi looked down at the boarding pass, still resting calmly between her fingers. She had seen this look before. Not the face. The look. The quiet certainty that someone had already decided where she belonged before checking a single fact. She lifted her eyes again. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" she asked evenly. The gate agent didn't answer the question. Instead, she reached toward the boarding pass. "I'll need that." Naomi handed it over without hesitation. The agent examined it for only a second before shaking her head. "Something doesn't seem right." A supervisor standing nearby noticed the exchange and began walking over. Behind Naomi, the boarding line slowed to a stop. Rolling suitcases stopped clicking across the floor. Conversations faded. Even the overhead announcements seemed farther away beneath the growing tension gathering around gate C-18. Naomi remained perfectly still. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. Experience had taught her that panic only distracted from the truth. Calm invited people to reveal themselves. Across the seating area, a young trainee wearing an airline badge glanced toward the gate monitor, then back toward Naomi with a puzzled expression, as if something about the passenger's name had caught her attention. Before she could speak, the supervisor arrived. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked. "Possible documentation problem," the gate agent replied confidently, never taking her eyes off Naomi. "I don't believe she should be boarding this aircraft." The supervisor nodded without asking another question. "Please step away from the line, ma'am." Naomi slowly looked around at the dozens of strangers, now watching every move. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked impatient. A few simply looked curious. Then she returned her attention to the supervisor and offered the faintest hint of a smile. "Are you both absolutely certain," she asked quietly, "that this is the decision you want to make?" The supervisor extended his hand without a trace of hesitation. "Your identification, please." Naomi reached into her jacket pocket and handed over her driver's license with the same composed expression she had carried since stepping into the boarding line. He glanced at the card for less than 2 seconds before passing it to the gate agent, who compared the photograph to the woman standing in front of her as though she expected to discover a contradiction. "Please wait over there," the supervisor said, pointing toward a row of empty seats beside the gate podium. Naomi quietly picked up her carry-on and walked exactly where he indicated. She neither protested nor attempted to rejoin the line. Around her, passengers whispered in low voices, trying to guess what had happened. Some assumed there had been a problem with her reservation. Others believed there must be a security concern. No one knew they were watching a test that had begun long before anyone reached for a boarding pass. Naomi Brooks had not booked this trip because she needed to be in Seattle. She could have attended the next morning's executive meeting through a secure video conference from her office. Instead, she had deliberately chosen to travel on one of the airline's busiest afternoon departures because customer complaints had quietly accumulated over the previous year. They described something difficult to measure but impossible to ignore. Travelers repeatedly mentioned feeling judged before they were served. Some spoke about appearance. Others mentioned race, clothing, or assumptions made before a single question was asked. Reports reached executives. Meetings were scheduled. New training modules were introduced. Customer satisfaction charts improved on paper. Yet Naomi believed numbers only revealed part of the truth. Real culture appeared when employees believed no executive was watching. That belief had brought her to gate C-18 dressed like any ordinary traveler. No luxury watch rested on her wrist. No premium luggage displayed recognizable designer logos. Even her ticket had been purchased through the airline's public website under her legal name without requesting any executive accommodation. She wanted every step of the journey to unfold naturally. If employees treated every passenger with equal respect, the day would end quietly. If they did not, she intended to understand exactly why. Behind the counter, the gate agent typed rapidly into her computer while exchanging brief comments with the supervisor. Every few moments they looked toward Naomi before returning their attention to the screen. A young trainee wearing a fresh airline badge stood several feet away, pretending to organize boarding documents while stealing uncertain glances toward the reservation monitor. Something seemed to trouble her. She checked the passenger list once, then again, her eyebrows tightening as if two facts refused to fit together. Before she could approach, another employee quietly guided her toward the jet bridge with a stack of paperwork. Naomi noticed the exchange but remained silent. Years earlier, during the first months of building her transportation company, she had learned that people often revealed far more when nobody interrupted them. Silence was uncomfortable for those who relied on assumptions. Eventually, they filled that silence themselves. She folded her hands over the handle of her suitcase and watched families board, business travelers scan their phones, and children wave excitedly toward the aircraft outside the terminal windows. Every passing minute said more about the organization than another corporate presentation ever could. The question was no longer whether someone had made a mistake. The real question was how far they were willing to carry that mistake before anyone stopped to ask whether they were treating the right passenger the wrong way. The boarding process continued around Naomi as though she had become invisible, yet every few seconds another pair of eyes drifted toward the woman sitting quietly beside her carry-on. The gate agent held Naomi's boarding pass instead of returning it, placing it face down beside the keyboard while speaking in a lowered voice with the supervisor. He leaned over the computer monitor, scrolling through reservation details without once looking back toward the passenger whose trip had suddenly been interrupted. A few moments later, he picked up a telephone behind the counter. His voice was calm, but his words carried enough for nearby travelers to hear. "I need another verification at gate C-18. Possible documentation inconsistency." Naomi heard every syllable. She simply folded her hands again. A businessman wearing an expensive gray blazer stepped confidently toward the boarding lane. He arrived after boarding had officially begun, apologized for being late, and smiled at the gate agent. "No problem at all, sir," she replied warmly before scanning his boarding pass. Less than 3 seconds later, he walked down the jet bridge without another question. Naomi watched the exchange with quiet attention. The contrast required no explanation. A mother traveling with 2 young children approached next. One child's ticket failed to scan on the first attempt. The gate agent smiled patiently, re-scanned it, and wished the family a pleasant flight. Naomi noticed the difference in tone more than the difference in procedure. The trainee standing several feet away noticed it too. She glanced once more at the passenger manifest displayed on another monitor before cautiously stepping closer to the supervisor. "Excuse me," she began softly. He barely turned his head. "Not now." The young employee hesitated, then quietly stepped back without finishing her sentence. Across the seating area, an older woman looked toward Naomi with concern. "Did something happen?" she asked gently. Naomi offered a polite smile. "They are reviewing my reservation." The woman frowned. "That seems to be taking a very long time." Before Naomi could answer, the supervisor returned carrying a small clipboard. "Ma'am, we also need to verify your travel purpose." Naomi looked at him steadily. "My travel purpose?" "Yes." "Is every passenger being asked that question today?" For the first time, the supervisor hesitated. "We are simply following procedure." Naomi nodded once. "Then I would appreciate the same procedure being applied consistently." He ignored the observation and continued writing notes on the clipboard. Another employee approached the counter, whispered something into the supervisor's ear, and handed him a portable radio. Seconds later, a uniformed airport security officer appeared near the entrance to the gate area. The officer remained several yards away, neither speaking nor approaching, apparently waiting for instructions. The sight immediately changed the atmosphere. Conversations became quieter. Several passengers looked away awkwardly, while others pretended to focus on their phones, even though their attention never truly left Naomi. She remained exactly where she was, neither intimidated nor impatient. She had spent decades negotiating billion-dollar agreements where emotions often clouded judgment. Airports were no different. Pressure merely arrived wearing a different uniform. The trainee looked toward the security officer, then back at Naomi. Her expression shifted from uncertainty to concern. She quietly reopened the reservation screen one more time, carefully reading every line attached to Naomi Brooks's booking. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly before she quickly searched another internal page. Whatever she found caused her breathing to pause. She looked toward the supervisor again, preparing to speak despite having already been dismissed once. At that exact moment, the gate agent closed Naomi's boarding record without completing the final boarding scan and said firmly, "Until we receive additional clearance, this passenger will not be boarding this aircraft." The words hung over the gate like a final announcement no one wanted to question. Several passengers quietly resumed watching the boarding process, but not everyone looked away. The trainee could not. Her name badge read Emily Carter, and although she had been with the airline for only 3 months, she had spent enough time learning the reservation system to recognize that certain traveler profiles carried internal notes that ordinary employees rarely encountered. She looked once more at Naomi Brooks's record. The boarding authorization was valid. The identification check had already cleared. The payment had been verified days earlier. More importantly, another notation appeared beside the reservation, one that required immediate attention rather than unnecessary delay. Emily blinked twice, convinced she had misunderstood what she was seeing. She refreshed the screen. The notation remained exactly where it had been. She gathered enough courage to approach the supervisor again. "Sir," she said carefully, keeping her voice respectful, "I think we should review this reservation one more time before making a final decision." The supervisor barely glanced in her direction. "We already reviewed it." Emily swallowed. "There is additional information attached to the account." The gate agent shook her head dismissively. "The account is under review. That is all you need to know." Emily hesitated. Every instinct told her something about the situation was wrong. She had watched dozens of boarding issues during training. Delayed connections, expired passports, duplicate reservations, weather interruptions. None of them had unfolded like this. Procedures answered questions. Assumptions created new ones. Across the waiting area, a man in his early 60s quietly closed the novel he had been reading. "Excuse me," he called toward the counter. "Has this passenger actually done anything wrong?" The supervisor answered without looking at him. "Sir, this does not involve you." The older man nodded slowly. It became everyone's business when you stopped the entire boarding line. A few travelers exchanged glances. Another passenger, a young woman returning from a business conference, quietly lifted her phone. She did not point it directly at anyone. She simply began recording the gate area while pretending to check a message. "Something feels off," she whispered to the traveler beside her. Near the entrance to the jet bridge, one of the flight attendants preparing the cabin looked through the open doorway toward the gate podium. She recognized the unusual delay immediately. Normally, boarding continued with practiced rhythm. Instead, passengers stood waiting while employees gathered around a single traveler who remained seated without raising her voice. The flight attendant studied Naomi's face for only a second before a faint expression of recognition crossed her own. She had seen that face before, though not inside an airport. It had appeared during an executive leadership broadcast months earlier. The memory surfaced slowly, just beyond certainty. Before she could step into the terminal, another crew member called her back to assist with final cabin preparations. Emily looked once more at the reservation screen, then at Naomi sitting quietly with her hands resting on the handle of her suitcase. The calmness unsettled her more than anger ever could. Most frustrated passengers demanded explanations within minutes. Naomi had asked only factual questions and accepted every delay without argument. Emily finally walked away from the counter, crossed the short distance to where Naomi was seated, and lowered her voice. "Ma'am," she said gently, "I cannot explain everything yet, but I truly believe someone needs to look at your reservation more carefully." Naomi met her eyes with the same composed expression she had carried all afternoon. "Thank you," she replied softly. "Sometimes all it takes to change a room is one person willing to look twice." Emily nodded almost instinctively. Behind them, the supervisor reached for the airport radio again, unaware that the first person to question his decision had finally found the courage to speak aloud. Emily's quiet warning lingered in the air long after she stepped back toward the counter. Naomi remained seated, watching the terminal through the tall windows where baggage carts moved beneath the afternoon sun with mechanical precision. Airplanes departed on schedule. Ground crews followed checklists. Every system around her depended on consistency. Yet only a few feet away, consistency had quietly disappeared. The supervisor spoke briefly with the airport security officer before walking directly toward Naomi. His expression had hardened into the confidence of someone who believed procedure alone justified every decision. "Ma'am," he said, stopping in front of her, "we are instructing you to leave the boarding area until this review is complete." Naomi looked up calmly. "Has my ticket been canceled?" "No." "Has my identification failed verification?" "No." "Has anyone informed me that I violated an airline policy?" The supervisor hesitated for the first time that afternoon. "We are simply asking for your cooperation." Naomi nodded thoughtfully. "I have cooperated with every request since arriving at this gate." The security officer stood nearby without speaking, maintaining a respectful distance while waiting for direction. Several passengers watched silently. The older gentleman who had spoken earlier closed his book again. The young woman with the phone lowered it slightly, but continued recording. Nobody seemed interested in boarding anymore. They were watching something much larger than a delayed flight unfold in real time. The supervisor exhaled slowly. "If you choose not to leave the gate area, your travel today may be affected." Naomi's expression never changed. "My travel has already been affected." The words landed softly, but they carried more weight than any raised voice could have. For a brief moment, the terminal disappeared around her. She remembered another airport nearly 19 years earlier. She had been 23 years old, carrying a borrowed suitcase after spending every dollar she had to attend a transportation conference that could change the future of her small startup. Back then, another employee had looked at her inexpensive clothes before looking at her ticket. She remembered waiting nearly an hour while other passengers boarded around her. She remembered hearing someone quietly ask whether she belonged in the premium boarding lane. She remembered promising herself during that lonely flight home that if she ever built a company with the power to influence how people were treated, respect would never depend on appearance. The memory faded as quickly as it had arrived. Naomi returned her attention to the present. The supervisor extended his hand. "I will need your boarding pass while this matter remains under review." Naomi noticed that he still held it instead of returning it. "You have already kept it," she replied evenly. He looked down, almost surprised to find the document still resting in his own hand. Around them, the silence grew heavier. Emily stood frozen behind the counter, visibly uncomfortable. The flight attendant at the jet bridge looked toward the gate again, recognition becoming stronger with every passing minute. She quietly excused herself from another crew member and took one careful step into the terminal before stopping again, uncertain whether she should intervene. Naomi slowly reached into her jacket pocket and removed her phone. There was no frustration in her movement, no urgency, only quiet certainty. She unlocked the screen, found a familiar contact, and rested her thumb above the call button. Looking up at the supervisor, she offered one final opportunity. "Everything that happens next," she said gently, "depends on whether someone here decides to verify facts instead of assumptions." No one answered. Naomi pressed the call icon. The call connected before the first ring had fully ended. "Olivia," Naomi said in the same calm voice she had used all afternoon. "Begin executive response protocol. I am at gate C18. Please document everything from the moment my boarding pass was withheld." There was no pause on the other end. "Already underway," Olivia replied. "Your location has been confirmed. Corporate legal has been notified. Customer experience audit is joining the review. Executive operations has been alerted. I am opening a live incident log now." Naomi nodded once. "Thank you." She ended the call without another word and slipped the phone back into her pocket. The supervisor exchanged a brief glance with the gate agent before allowing himself a faint smile. Calling a lawyer is not going to change airline policy, he said confidently. Naomi looked at him with quiet patience. No, she answered. It rarely changes policy. It reveals whether policy has been followed. The remark lingered in the silence that followed. Emily watched the exchange while her attention kept returning to the reservation screen. She refreshed the record again. A new notification suddenly appeared across the top of the internal system. Access history had been locked. The passenger profile had entered executive review status. Emily had never seen that designation before. She quietly opened the information panel, but every field beyond the reservation details was now restricted. Her heartbeat quickened. Whatever had just happened was unlike anything covered during training. At nearly the same moment, inside a corporate office hundreds of miles away, electronic notifications began appearing one after another. Customer experience received an automatic escalation. Internal compliance opened an incident record. Corporate legal requested preservation of gate communications. Executive operations flagged the active flight for immediate observation. None of those actions were visible to the employees standing at gate C18. They continued believing they controlled the situation. The gate agent folded her arms. Boarding will continue without this passenger. She scanned another boarding pass and welcomed the traveler aboard with a pleasant smile before returning to Naomi with the same guarded expression. The difference in tone did not escape anyone watching. The older gentleman slowly shook his head. Interesting, he murmured. Courtesy seems to depend on who is standing at the counter. The young woman recording quietly lowered her phone long enough to whisper, "She has not argued once." Beside the jet bridge, the flight attendant finally remembered where she had seen Naomi's face. It had not been in an advertisement. It had been during a leadership webcast shown throughout the airline after a major strategic partnership was announced the previous year. The image surfaced clearly now, though she could not remember the details. She took another careful step toward the terminal before stopping beside Emily. "Who was that passenger?" she asked softly. Emily swallowed. "I do not know," she admitted. But something about her reservation changed the entire system. Before the flight attendant could respond, the supervisor's portable radio crackled. He listened for several seconds, frowned slightly, then answered, "Yes, she is still here." Another pause followed. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Understood," he replied before lowering the radio. The confidence he had displayed all afternoon no longer appeared quite as certain. Naomi noticed the shift, but remained seated with both hands resting lightly on her suitcase. She had seen organizations respond to pressure before. First came confidence, then confusion. Finally came questions no one expected to ask. Across the gate area, another notification quietly appeared on Emily's monitor. This one contained only 6 words, yet they caused every color to drain from her face. It read, "Executive leadership requesting immediate live verification." Emily stared at the flashing notification as though the screen itself had stopped breathing. She looked from the monitor to Naomi and then back again, afraid she had misunderstood what she was reading. Executive leadership requesting immediate live verification. Those words did not appear for ordinary passengers. They did not appear for delayed flights or misplaced luggage. They appeared only when someone far above the airport had decided to become personally involved. Emily slowly raised her hand. "Sir," she called to the supervisor, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I really think you need to see this." He walked over with visible impatience. "I already told you we are handling it." Emily quietly turned the monitor toward him. His eyes moved across the message once. Then he read it again more carefully. The confidence in his posture faded almost instantly. "Refresh it," he said. Emily did. A second notification appeared beneath the first. Regional executive team connecting to station. The supervisor's mouth tightened. Before he could respond, the telephone behind the counter rang with a sharp tone that cut through the entire gate area. The gate agent answered casually. "Gate C18. Her expression changed within seconds. "Yes, she is here." "No, she is not boarded." She glanced toward the supervisor before lowering her voice. "Understood." When she placed the receiver down, the color had disappeared from her face. "Regional operations is asking questions," she whispered. "They want to know why the passenger is still sitting here." The supervisor looked toward Naomi for the first time without certainty. She remained exactly where she had been since the delay began, composed, patient, and completely unshaken. The older gentleman smiled faintly as he watched the change unfold. "Looks like somebody important finally noticed," he murmured. The young woman who had quietly recorded the incident lowered her phone. "I had a feeling this was not going the way they expected," she said. At that moment, the flight attendant stepped fully into the terminal. She studied Naomi's face one final time before recognition settled completely. "I know who she is," she said softly to Emily. The words were quiet, but the supervisor heard them anyway. "Who?" he asked quickly. The flight attendant hesitated only a second. "That is Naomi Brooks." Silence settled over the gate. Emily blinked. The gate agent stared without speaking. Even the airport security officer shifted his attention toward Naomi. The supervisor frowned. "How do you know that?" The flight attendant answered carefully. She addressed every department during last year's Executive Partnership Summit. Her company transformed our national freight network. Every leadership team attended the presentation. The supervisor's eyes widened as pieces that had refused to fit together suddenly aligned. Naomi slowly stood, smoothing the front of her simple charcoal shirt before looking calmly at everyone gathered around the counter. She did not smile. She did not sound angry. She simply spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who no longer needed to explain herself. "You believed you stopped an ordinary passenger," she said. "You did not. You stopped someone who trusted this airline enough to help build its future." No one answered. Every conversation around the gate had disappeared. Boarding had completely stopped. Naomi looked at the supervisor one final time. "You never questioned my ticket," she continued. "You questioned whether someone who looked like me belonged behind it. That was never a reservation problem. It was a judgment problem." At that exact moment, hurried footsteps echoed across the terminal as several senior airport executives appeared at the far end of the concourse, moving directly toward gate C18 with unmistakable urgency. The group of executives reached the gate almost out of breath, their pace alone announcing that this was no ordinary customer service issue. Leading them was Regional Vice President Daniel Mercer, followed by the Director of Airport Operations, the station manager, and two members of the airline's corporate compliance team who had been connected remotely only minutes earlier. Daniel did not begin by speaking to the supervisor. He walked directly to Naomi and extended his hand. "Ms. Brooks, I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "We should have recognized what was happening long before this reached you." Naomi accepted the handshake politely, but without celebration. "Recognition was never the issue," she replied. "Respect should not depend on recognition." Those standing nearby heard every word. The supervisor lowered his eyes. The gate agent stared silently at the boarding pass she had been holding for nearly 20 minutes, as though it suddenly weighed far more than paper should. Daniel turned toward the counter. "Return Ms. Brooks's boarding pass." Immediately, the gate agent handed it back with trembling fingers. Naomi accepted it quietly without a trace of triumph. Daniel then addressed the supervisor. "Your access to boarding decisions is suspended pending a formal review. Effective immediately, another manager will assume responsibility for this flight." The supervisor instinctively reached for his employee tablet, but before he could unlock it, the screen displayed a security notice stating that operational authority had been temporarily removed. He looked at the message in stunned silence. Moments later, the gate agent attempted to reopen the boarding application, only to discover her administrative permissions had also been restricted while the investigation remained active. No one raised a voice. No dramatic confrontation followed. The system itself had answered the questions people refused to ask. The airport security officer quietly stepped back, realizing there had never been a safety concern to begin with. Emily watched everything unfold, her emotions shifting from anxiety to relief. Daniel noticed her standing near the monitor. "Were you the employee who requested another review of the reservation?" Emily nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir." Something in the record did not match the decision being made. Daniel offered a grateful smile. "Thank you for speaking up. Organizations improve because people have the courage to question assumptions." The flight attendant who had recognized Naomi stood nearby, equally silent. Around the gate, passengers exchanged knowing looks. The older gentleman closed his novel once again and smiled. "Facts finally caught up," he said softly. The young woman who had quietly documented the incident stopped recording altogether. I think the most important part already happened, she whispered. Daniel turned back toward the gathered travelers. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Boarding will resume shortly. We sincerely apologize for the unnecessary delay and for the experience witnessed here today. No one applauded. Instead, something quieter settled over the terminal. People simply nodded, as though they understood that accountability mattered more than spectacle. Naomi looked around the gate one final time. Every face she met now carried the same expression that had been missing when she first arrived. Not admiration, not embarrassment, awareness. She had never wanted special treatment. She had only wanted the standard promised to every passenger. As boarding resumed, Daniel personally invited Naomi to proceed first. She declined with a gentle smile. The families and the passengers who have been waiting should go ahead, she said. I have already waited a little longer. A few more minutes will not change anything. What matters is that the next person who walks through this gate is seen before they are judged. The last families boarded first, just as Naomi had requested. Parents guided sleepy children down the jet bridge. Business travelers rolled their carry-on bags forward, and the steady rhythm of boarding finally returned to gate C18. Naomi waited quietly near the windows overlooking the runway, watching another aircraft lift into the evening sky. She had spent years believing that culture was revealed in ordinary moments rather than extraordinary speeches. Boardrooms created values. Everyday choices proved whether those values were real. Daniel Mercer approached once more, holding a small folder. The initial review has already begun, he said. Corporate legal, customer experience, and executive operations will receive the complete incident record before the day is over. Every statement, every decision, and every system action has been preserved. Naomi nodded appreciatively. That is how accountability begins, she replied. Not with embarrassment. With honesty. Emily stepped forward hesitantly. Ms. Brooks, she said, I almost stayed quiet. Naomi smiled warmly. But you did not. Emily lowered her eyes. I was afraid I might be wrong. Integrity is rarely comfortable, Naomi answered. It simply asks whether we are willing to look twice when everyone else has already decided. Emily thanked her softly, understanding that those words would stay with her far longer than any training manual. The flight attendant who had recognized Naomi also stepped forward. I should have spoken sooner, she admitted. Naomi gently shook her head. The important thing is that you chose to speak before it was too late. Around them, the atmosphere felt entirely different from the one that had greeted Naomi less than an hour earlier. People were no longer whispering about whether she belonged. They were reflecting on how quickly assumptions could replace facts. The older gentleman smiled as he passed Naomi on his way toward the aircraft. Safe travels, he said. And thank you for reminding all of us that patience can be stronger than anger. Naomi returned the smile. Safe travels to you as well. The young woman who had quietly recorded the events slipped her phone into her bag without posting anything. She realized the lesson she would remember was not the confrontation itself, but the dignity with which it had been answered. At last, Daniel invited Naomi to board. This time she accepted. She walked calmly down the jet bridge with the same measured pace she had maintained since entering the terminal hours earlier. Nothing about her appearance had changed. The same charcoal shirt, the same faded jeans, the same white sneakers, the same small black carry-on. Only the eyes following her were different. They no longer saw an assumption. They saw a person they should have respected from the beginning. As Naomi reached the aircraft door, she paused briefly and looked back toward the gate one final time. The supervisor and gate agent were already speaking with the compliance team, while Emily quietly assisted passengers with renewed confidence. Naomi knew that policies could always be rewritten, but standards lived inside people. They rose or fell one decision at a time. She stepped onto the aircraft and took her seat without requesting recognition, upgrades, or special attention. The cabin door closed, the engines gradually came alive, and the airplane began moving toward the runway. Outside, the lights of the airport stretched across the evening like countless opportunities to choose better tomorrow than yesterday. Naomi looked out the window and smiled quietly to herself. Real leadership was never about proving who held power. It was about making sure that the next stranger walking through the same gate would never have to prove they deserved simple human dignity before receiving it.